50,000 plus workplace situations, brands in luxury retail like Prada, to oil and gas, which are companies such as Indian Oil, ONGC, to many others having chosen GLEAC to upskill their workforce. Sallyann is also the founder of the Growing Leaders Foundation, which delivers soft skills in partnership with the UNDP. Thousands of at-risk youths and adults annually benefit from her foundation's work. In 2016, Sallyann served as the only female in a C-suite position at Kareem to help stabilize the workforce and shape its organizational culture. And that's why we have Sallyann here today to share her experience and storytelling with us, SPETT, the Diversity and Inclusion section. And so I pass over the microphone to Sally. Actually, one thing before I let Sally speak, you guys, while Sally is presenting, feel free during the presentation to type in questions in the chat box, but we will address those questions at the end of her presentation, as well as while we're going through the questions segment. I will put a link in the chat box for you guys to do a review on the session. Thank you so much, and Sallyann, I'm so happy to have you here. Take it away.
Thank you. So first of all, I thank you wholeheartedly, Liana, but you forgot the most important thing, is that I'm actually a Trini.
Yes.
That was the absolutely most important thing of all the ornaments. You know, I wear that very proudly. And I have to say to you, being in this part of the world, many people do not know Trinidad and Tobago. However, whenever they ask me where I'm from and I say the West Indies because of cricket, immediately I'm very, very popular with all the Uber drivers from Pakistan and India. And they always say, we've never had anybody from the West Indies. And then, of course, I get 1,000,001 questions about Brian Lara and Chris Gale, and I don't know, all of these people. And I do have to tell you, I left Trinidad, you know, very young, and I've never watched a cricket match. So ever. So trying to navigate that, not watching a cricket match has been quite interesting out here in this part of the world. So thank you, all of you, wholeheartedly for giving me the absolute, you know, blessing of your attention on a Saturday morning. You know, it's, I always say someone's attention is really the infinite resource that you have, and I feel privileged to spend you know, the next 30, 40 minutes with you guys. So I'm going to go through a presentation on leadership and share some of my stories. And hopefully the stories of leadership, this is not really a traditional leadership presentation. I'm sure many of you have been to many of them, but really it is kind of going to the crucial conversations we very often do not have. And really being able to openly share those and have raw conversations about them. So I really love having a two-way conversation. So if there are moments where you absolutely have to have a question, for some reason, Leanne, I'm not seeing people's comments on my screen. So just please make sure wherever those questions are, I'm able to get those, because for some reason it's not showing up for me. All right, let me share the presentation. One second, and let me open this up. Okay, so I'm going to start. Can you guys see my screen? Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to start from a place where very often we do not have this conversation, but I think we need to have this conversation, and particularly the women in the room need to have this conversation. It was something I learned, and it's a really simple statement, and we're going to talk about it: leadership being a choice, and you can choose to opt out. And, you know, I'll give you a little story about myself and opting out of leadership. You know, many times we think we have to go through this trajectory of we start out and we become managers, and then we become leaders, and that's how traditional paths define success. For me, I'll share this story about Kareem. Kareem is a ride-hailing app. I'm not sure if you have ride-hailing yet in Trinidad and Tobago, since I haven't been there in over 5 years. But Kareem was purchased by Uber for $3.1 billion. To kind of give you an idea, I'm pretty sure many of you might know Uber. And I was head of people at Kareem. And, it was one of those things where those founders, I was running my foundation and very happy running my foundation, making a difference in the world, upskilling corporates and youth in human work skills like leadership, judgment and decision making, critical thinking, etc. And the Kareem founders had raised in a Series B $60 million. And it was two young founders. We were all, about the same age at the time. They were McKinsey guys. And they came to me and they said, we really were losing 50% of our workforce every 6 months. And we really want you to come and lead people at a founder's level. And this was, a very fast growing company, right? So in the startup world, I'm sure you guys, in short period of time, you can become a unicorn in this space. And they came and they originally asked me, and they said, we know you as the people lady, and you can solve our people problems for us. And my original reaction to it was, no, I left corporate. I am doing exactly what I want to do. I'm making a difference in the world. I'm running my foundation, in India and in the Middle East and in the Caribbean. And I really don't want to go back to corporate. And after about 6 months of, their board and everyone kind of coming, they're like, it's an opportunity of a lifetime. Come on board at a founder's level. And I was the only female brought on at a C-suite level, making exactly what these founders were making with stock, at a founder's level. And let's see, if you would be interested in this. So I said, I'll come take a look. So, this is the first thing about leadership being a choice. It doesn't matter how sweet the leadership might look. Many times our intuition can tell us if it is the right place for us or the right situation for us. So I did go and take a look. And about 6 weeks in, I knew in my heart, I remember just standing at the bottom of the elevator going up and going, there is just no way I am going to survive this. Granted, I was, making in a year, well over a 6-figure salary. My stock options is the equivalent today of $12 million US dollars. But I just knew that I did not want to be in that place and investing my time. Now, nothing wrong with the company and the founders, incredible founders and incredible company. It was just not aligned to who I wanted to become and who I wanted to be in the world and what I wanted to be spending my time doing. So I think, one of the things you really need to ask yourself, and I had the luxury. So I want to say this also, many of us might not have the luxury of saying no. But, I do have to say that if you've gone through a management position and you're going into a leadership position, you need to ask that question is this really aligned? Because leadership is a verb and it requires action. And if you're going to take on the authority of it, you need to take on the responsibility of it. And if you know going into it that you're not going to be there or it's not aligned, that's when, you get into a lot of trouble. So I walked away from that role on my own. The two founders, they kind of said to me, it was my birthday and I went off to Japan for my birthday and I came back and they're like, you are not coming back. And I said, no, I'll hire the department for you. I'll set you guys up. I said, but this is not where I want to be. And for the women in the room and even for the males, right? So, I particularly single out women because a lot of discussions happen about women not taking on C-suite roles and leadership roles. And, I want to say this, nobody has ever asked the question, are they doing that by choice? Because many women by choice, if you do not have the support system, by choice, you make decisions, and sometimes, it might just not just be aligned to who you want to become. You say no to leadership positions. So I want you to keep that in mind, both the male and the females in the room, is leadership is a choice. It is not an automatic, like going up the elevator and you just go up and you get to the top, because each level of it has different responsibility and authority. And some of us just don't absolutely want that. And I think it's something we just don't talk about. So that's the first thing. And, the important thing of when you're making that decision in terms of whether you want to take on leadership or not, is you need to really be truthful with yourself in terms of where are you standing. And I'm going to share with you another story. So, knowing your why, I'm sure you've always heard about this, but I want you to look at the little chart off to the right where it says work-life balance. And there is something called Maslow hierarchy of needs. So it's a pyramid. And if any of you are familiar with psychology, at the bottom of the pyramid, this is, kind of baseline. I'm working to, pay my rent, have food on the table. That's like baseline. And that's normally when you have a job. And you can have a job as a leader. So there's a reason I'm telling you this, not because you are an entry person. That means you have a job. Many leaders, they have a job. They are only there up until somebody offers them more to go into another job as a leader. And you have to, it's a conversation, again, we don't have. So, being really frank with yourself, if you are in leadership, even looking at, is this a job? Some of us, and the majority of us, might fit into this being the middle layer, which is career. So we are in the role that we are, whether it be in a leadership role, management role, or entry-level role, because we see this leading to something else. And, we have bonds with friends. So all of this is kind of where a career we work a little bit after, to try and make sure that this will position us for our next big move. That's the career we're looking to move up. So that's the career trajectory. And then the final trajectory, which is the top of Maslow hierarchy of needs, which is self-actualization and self-transformation. This is where everything that you're doing is aligned to who you really are. And very few people are in that space. And it doesn't matter. You can be the janitor and be aligned to, I just want to give people a space where they feel secure, safe, and clean. It might be at the highest level, so I consider myself very fortunate as a leader that, I've always been in the whispering potential space to people and getting people seen and being able to signal their potential. And I have the privilege of doing it in my job, leading my company as the CEO. So our, leaders can be in all of these three arenas. And I think very often we think, the leader, it's in their calling and they were meant to do this. It's the reason why many leaders fail. I'm sure you've read the story of a CEO who was doing brilliant at one company and then moves on to another company and is not doing that well. Well, for many instances, it might not be aligned to their calling. It might not be aligned to their career trajectory. It might just be a job and they moved over to somewhere else as a job and it just did not work out because the other areas were not aligned. So, being really frank with yourself as to why you are seeking that leadership position or why you are currently, and nothing's wrong with all three, just so that you know that it's responsible to have a job and take care of your family and put food on the table and have a roof. It's responsible to have a career. Very few are in that calling space, which is your highest area of flow as a leader. And if you're on shore, there are a couple of questions you can ask yourself to kind of figure this out. What does your perfect day look like right now? What are you spending your time doing in and outside of work? What does your perfect day look like a year from now? So it gives you a hint or idea of, I'm in flow, I'm in a good place, or I really want to be in a different place. The next question is, if you're, this is where you are and this is where you want to be, what are you willing to do, explore, or give up to get there, right? So that's, it's a really an equation of, if you do nothing, nothing happens, right? It's just simple as that, simple math. So it's a really, what am I going to add? What am I going to subtract? And if I don't know what to add and subtract, what am I going to explore that's different from my everyday routine to figure out what I'm going to add and subtract? The bigger question is, who do you want to become? It's one of those tough questions. And I I don't care if we're in the world today where you can be 50 years old and 60 years old and you are allowed to ask that question. It is not, we don't live anymore in the world of our parents and our grandparents where one job can last you 30 and 40 years. Maybe in some places, in some developing countries still, but the world is changing. I mean, look at your sector, the oil and gas sector, and with the whole world about sustainability and renewable energy and all of this stuff. I mean, it is, you are living your entire sector changing right now. So, you know, that's one of the questions you have to ask yourself. Who do I want to become? And if you don't know the answer to that, what would you regret not doing if today was your last day, right? That's another way of answering that exact same question of what would you regret? And for each one of those items, ask yourself why 5 times. Because what does my perfect day look like? And if you ask, why does this look like my perfect day? And if you ask yours, keep ask why again and why again, you know, the truth comes out with 5 whys. So I'm going to share this story with you of how this plays out in terms of a leadership role. So this is a story of a person named Matt Siegelman. So Matt, I know really well, but I want to share this story with you because I think you will all enjoy it. So Matt owns a company called Burning Glass. They are the #1, along with MZ, who was their competitor, labor analytics company in the world, right? So if you look in America and you Google MZ and Burning Glass, they were the ones who would tell you all the statistics of what jobs are available, how many people are on the market, what you should be learning, etc. Matt, as a leader, he was the CEO of Burning Glass, and Andrew was the CEO of MZ. I know both very well. They were, you know, hard competitors. Matt made, as a CEO, a very, very cutthroat move and went and bought out the first position of MZ's investor. So Matt, literally, it's like you having a loan and your competitor buys out the loan and now owns your house. So Matt became, this just happened in the last 6 months, you know, it just played out all over, you know, our world of skills, and you can read up on it. So Matt goes in, fires Andrew, the CEO that was his competitor, and takes over his competitor's company. So Burning Glass now becomes MZ Burning Glass. You know, everyone is talking about this all over the world. These are the top 2 labor analytics companies in the world. This is leadership. So I'm giving you an example of this why that I just explained to you. So Matt takes over, MZ's in Idaho, and Matt, last 2 weeks ago, writes this message on LinkedIn. And, you know, I want to share it with you because he takes on now CEO of his company, the competitor's company, and he says, and I'm just going to read it out for you. So earlier this year, I shared with you some exciting news of the merger of Burning Glass and MZ. Now, with our integration well on the way, I want to let you know that I've decided to step aside as CEO after 19 phenomenal years. As someone who has built both a company and a career tracking the labor market, I am struck by how paradigmatic my decision is of workforce transformation we are living in. Through the first 15 months of the pandemic, I went from being away from my family almost every night to being with my family every day. In many ways, it was the first time in my life that I felt like a father. Dinner every night, reading together, even slogging with the older children through Latin conjunctions. Going back to my hectic travel schedule was never going to be easy. Then with our merger, I was back in the air constantly. For the first 3 months, there were only 2 weeks I didn't travel to Idaho. I remember one of my first trips vividly. My older children needed help with graphing linear equations, and I was on a flight to Seattle. I was working with them via Skype. I was super dad, except I wasn't. It became increasingly clear how imperfect this setup was. The anemic internet, the need for 6th graders to describe what it is far more easily shown on graph paper. The kids were melting down. I felt I had failed them. With our organization structure in place, it's clear that this weekly trek would need to become my ongoing routine. I may be old-fashioned in this new era remote world, but in my book, a big part of leadership is still being there. It has been an exceptional journey. And then he continues on and says, I will be staying on for my successor. So until I find my successor. So I share that story with you all because that's a perfect example of someone thinking that they wanted a certain type of leadership role. And they got there, took over their competitor, fired the other leader, and all of a sudden realized it was not aligned with their why. Right? Wasn't aligned with their why and who they wanted to become and how they saw their life. And, that's something we very often do not talk about, is taking on a leadership role and not recognizing all the issues that may come up. So let me go back to my presentation for you. So now the common mistake that happens in terms of leadership, and this will actually go into, and I will consider myself guilty of this. When I accepted the Kareem role, even though I had my intuition said, this is not for you, I was overly confident when I said yes. And I'm a very confident person. I communicate very, very well. I know my domain, but confidence alone, there's something called Dunning-Kruger effect. Many leaders, we mistake people to be leaders when we find them very confident, and they're very charismatic. We use these words, confident and charismatic, right? There are many people who are confident and charismatic, but they're not competent. And this is one of the big issues that we need to recognize. And sometimes hold the mirror up to ourselves as a leader. Am I? In terms of Dunning-Kruger, the people who generally think they know everything are the people who actually know the least. And generally, the smartest people in the room are constantly questioning themselves, wanting to know more and learning. And it's really the difference between a fixed and growth mindset. The fixed mindset, I'm sure you're familiar with it, is I have enough experience and I know. And you are not willing to have someone and be open enough for someone to allow you to change your mind about something with even evidence. On the growth mindset side is where competence and confidence becomes, fairly good. And you're constantly questioning yourself. So I think a lot of times, one of the things with leaders is we make the mistake and we give the label to confident people and charismatic people as, the best people to lead. And sometimes they are not. And you really need to consider in terms of Dunning-Kruger effect on this. Now, why are we afraid to say, we don't know and we might not be competent in something? It comes down to vulnerability. And I have a quick little video, one of my favorite ones on vulnerability I want to share with you guys. Hold on one second. Let me get rid of this ad.
Men, let's be honest.
Okay, hold on. We were getting rid of the men.
We may think we are, we even act like we are.
Hold on.
But our face tells a different story.
Skip ad. There you go. Can you see my screen?
What I found in my research is that vulnerability is not weak. In fact, I would argue that it's our greatest measure of courage. When we went out and asked people, what is vulnerability? We heard things like, vulnerability is the first date after my divorce. Vulnerability is starting my own company. Vulnerability is taking responsibility for something that went wrong at work. Vulnerability is sitting with my wife who has stage 3 breast cancer and making plans for our young kids. Vulnerability is taking my business public. The definition I use in my work of vulnerability is simply uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. Vulnerability is about the willingness to show up and to be seen, even when there are no guarantees. And it's interesting to me. One of the things that I thought was really interesting, I gave a talk, it's probably a couple of years now, and it was being translated by people doing American Sign Language. And they came up before the talk started. They said, are there any words that you're going to use a lot in your talk that we should, know about that or might be different. And I said, well, I use the word vulnerability a lot. And there were two of them, they kind of looked at each other and they said, oh, we do this for vulnerability. And I said, what does that mean? They said, it means weak in the knees. And I'm like, wow, that's not how I talk about vulnerability. And she said, well, there's only one other sign for vulnerability. And I said, what is it? And she said, and I said, oh, that's what I'm talking about. And so to me, vulnerability is our most accurate measure of courage. I mean, it's pretty powerful when I have 13,000 pieces of data collected over 12 years that I cannot find a single incident or story of courage that was not completely underpinned by vulnerability. I think the problem arises that there's so many little paradoxes with vulnerability, and one of them is that vulnerability is courage in you, but weakness in me. When I meet you, it's the first thing I look for in you, but it's the last thing I want to show you in me. And so I think to really put ourselves out there, knowing that if we do that enough, we're going to fail, I just don't think it gets more courageous than that.
So, hold on, 1 second. Vulnerability is courage. And, one of the reasons we fail to, the reason we kind of go to Ebbinghaus's effect, and we try to be really, really confident, even though we don't know stuff, is many times as leaders, we really don't want to admit that, leadership requires vulnerability, because we do not know the answers for everything. And vulnerability is not weakness. It is also courage, particularly depending on the fields that we're in, and if the information is changing and, all the time, as your sector is right now, it can be a very, very vulnerable place to be in, not knowing the answer and going, I wonder how that's going to look. To my subordinates. I wonder how that's going to look, and I will share a funny story with you. Part of GLEAC, we do industry exports mentoring. And recently I had, a big health company here in the region, one of the largest in the world, come to me and said, we would like to access your industry experts for our managers because they will not go to leadership with any of their issues because they don't want them to know they don't know. But they will come and talk to complete strangers to ask the questions and all the things they have gaps on because they were so afraid of going to leadership. It tells you something about the style of leadership and not providing the psychological safety in terms of, that's something that we don't talk about at all when it comes to leadership. Let me keep going 1 second. Let me get back to presentation again. Apologies. So vulnerability is an act of courage. It fosters good physical and mental health, clearly. There is one place, though, guys, where vulnerability, you need to be careful. It's called the pratfall effect. And the pratfall effect basically says that if you think someone is not being authentic or they are purely incompetent, you will actually, vulnerability is going to backfire on them. So I want you to keep that in mind, this pratfall effect. If the person in front of you is just not competent, and they are not competent, they don't have a growth mindset, and they come to you and say, well, I just don't know, you're actually not going to be supportive. That's an instance where vulnerability can work against them. Now, I talked about confident leaders. What about introverted leaders? Because a lot of times, we think introverted, is that even possible, to have an introverted leader? And a lot of times I think we mix up what we mean by introverted. We mix it up for someone being shy. So I'm an introvert. And many people are very surprised when I say that to them because I'm out there, I connect very well with people, I have strong communication skills, but the difference between introverted and extroverted is really where you get your energy. So when I come out and I do talks or I'm around people or with my teams, I just need to go and hide away under a rock Sometimes it's for a couple hours. Sometimes it might be for a full day, depending on the full on I am with people to get my energy back so I can stabilize again and come back out again. Some people, and I'm sure we know these people, it doesn't matter, 24/7, you know, they can be around people and it's like their electricity. People power them. That's the fundamental difference between an introvert and an extrovert. So it has nothing to do with whether an introvert, you know, it's just that we find a lot of extroverts because they have a lot of charisma and they tend to be very confident. You know, we tend to put them as the better leaders, but there is nothing stopping an introvert from being a great leader. You know, introverts are actually more inclined, they're the deep thinkers. So they're the ones who are actually solving deep challenges for companies. They're the best listeners. They talk less. They also, because they don't get so engaged, they give a really incredible outside perspective on what might be happening. Examples of introverted leaders are some of, you know, are actually the richest men in the world. You know, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, all introverts. They're not shy, however. And if we look back in history, Albert Einstein, Gandhi, Rosa Parks, all introverts. So there is at the end, I will give you guys access for free to on GLEAC to one of our mini benchmarks where you can go check out where you stand on the introvert extrovert spectrum. But I wanted to share with you my internal report because, you know, it's so important. And, you know, I'm not a big believer, and you should not be yourself, in personality tests. But it gives you a hint of where it is. And we have something called a behavioral benchmark at GLEAC. This is a master one. I will give you access to the mini one. But I want you to look at behaviors. And behaviors kind of tell you what is your knee-jerk behavior. We do not act the same in all instances. So I want you to keep that in mind. So for those of you who ever take any of these kind of not behavior personality tests, be very careful not to pigeonhole yourself. You're not one thing. You're changing and evolving all the time. But what's interesting that I saw, and it's very true about myself, so I look at my extroversion, and then below it, I look at my introversion. I'm a 5 on each, which, you know, is actually very accurate. You know, when I'm out there, people think I'm very, very extroverted, and then I disappear. What's really interesting, though, that I learned about myself on here, and, you know, leaders need to be self-aware of who you are. So what I learned about myself on every single behavioral benchmark I've taken, you see novelty seeking where I'm a 10. I didn't know this about myself, but novelty seeking, and if you look on here, intuition and free thinking, I'm a 9. It means I can't be doing the same thing over and over. And I never, you know, I always wondered, I lecture a lot all over the world. And I always wonder, you know, even today, you know, everybody says a week before, can you please send me your slides? The week before of my lectures, and I go, I haven't designed the talk yet. And I design it normally, you know, sometimes hours before I go into the talk, 24 hours. This one I designed, you know, I was thinking about it yesterday and, you know, finished the slides today. A novelty seeking means you can't do the same thing ever twice. And it pretty much defines my learning curve. Novelty seekers tend to be people who are learning very, very quickly, very, very intuitive. You know, and I share this with you because it's super important as a leader. You have to know yourself to grow yourself. You have to know yourself to grow yourself. Most of us don't know ourselves. We think we do, but we don't take the time to hold the mirror up and go, what is it that I need to thrive? So I'm going to go back to my Kareem stint. One of the reasons why I did not do well at Kareem, I didn't know it at the time, now I do, is their entire office was open space working. So there was no closed offices. An introverted person around all that energy all day, you cannot thrive. And I was not aware. I only became aware in the last 4 or 5 years where I really took a mirror up to myself and said, what is it do I need to thrive and lead? And I remember while I was there, I would run and hide out on the roof to get my work done because I couldn't focus with all the energy around me. I couldn't understand why I wasn't focusing. And That was just completely being unaware and subconsciously trying to find how I could survive in the environment, not recognizing. So for everyone in here who is in any kind of management or I cannot stress to you, sometimes you are not able to perform because it's little tiny things that you don't know about yourself, that you didn't take the time to figure out, that's impacting you. And that's so important that you take the time. And that was an example of where it played out for me in terms of not knowing myself. 1 second, let me go back to presentation. So that would be, you know, one of the things in terms of, can you guys see my presentation or no? I'm not seeing it.
Right now? No.
Yeah, are you seeing it now? Yes. Yeah, you are, right? So I'm going to go through, you know, fairly quickly because we already range versus depth in terms of leadership. Another thing people don't want to talk about. Do you really need to be an expert in something to be leading others in it? I don't know what your answer is. How many of you, why don't you answer in the chat box? How many of you think you really need to be an expert in something to be leading people in it? How many of you say no? So there is a book called Range. I really encourage, I'm going to show you guys, I really encourage all of you to get it. It's one of the most defining books for many of us in the leadership space. And, you know, here is the truth. All of our sectors and industries are changing right now. You know, most of us are going through data transformation, digital transformation, all kinds, I mean, at exponential levels. And the rule of thumb right now is people who have knowledge in many different domains are much more equipped to handle transformation versus if you're in a very stable sector, right? So I'll give you an example. Brain surgery. Certainly you don't want someone who hasn't been doing it for many, many years to come and be doing your brain surgery for you. If they tell you they have a side hustle, you know, being a librarian half the day, I would be very concerned about that person doing brain surgery for me. But you will find across the majority of sectors now, it's people from different sector experiences or who have a vast variety of interest are able to solve because they're able to look across domains. You'll notice now CEOs coming in and leadership coming into companies from completely different domains, and you're wondering, wait a minute, they didn't come from my sector. They don't even have the expertise. Why are you bringing them in? They're actually bringing in, it's just because they see the world entirely different. And when you have a sector in transformation, or you have departments in transformation and you need innovation to happen, you actually need people who know other domains to go, okay, this is how we can probably apply these combination of things within our sector. So today, range really matters if you're in a sector going through a lot of transformation versus depth. So it depends, but I would say right now, the world that we're living in right now with so much transformation happening across the board, range trumps depth in terms of where we stand today. The next, and I'll give you an example of me in this particular space, in terms of sharing my story. So, Liana mentioned I'm one of 4% of women in the world that is a sole inventor on a patent for an algorithm. I think I failed math, applied math, or anything around math. I have zero tech background. When I tell people I have a patent on measuring human skills, and I run a tech company, and I power some of the biggest companies in the world, like Accenture and all the biggest brands in the world, they're like, how? And if you recall, I have that very high novelty seeking, and I think on my feet. And my calling area is people and their potential. Right? That's where my lifetime body of work, since I was 13 years old, not knowing it, I was doing it as a side hustle and a hobby. So I have a natural flow and a natural advantage in that space because things come very easily to me. And I was able to even not being in the sector, I have zero education. You know, I'll give you a funny story. I came into the Middle East. I was hired by Mubadala, which is the government agency in Abu Dhabi, to design their entire STEAM curriculum. And this was back in 2013. And when I was headed over here, they said, could you please send all of your degrees? And, you know, I sent in, you know, I have a doctorate in law and a bunch of other degrees. And they came back to me and they said, but where is your education degree? And I said, I never told you I had an education degree. And, you know, there was a moment there where I thought, oh, my goodness, I'm going to get rejected for the gig. And thank goodness I have this doctorate, which is the highest level. And once you have a doctorate, you can kind of get in, you bypass everything else. And I was able to get in. But that was an example of where I designed curriculum for the U.S. government. I've been designing a lot of, workplace skilling, and I'm just doing it very naturally. And I remember when I went to Harvard and I was in the organizational behavior class, because finally at some point I was like, I need to go get a degree in this. Like, this is nuts that I'm doing all of this stuff and I have zero educational background in it. And I remember sitting in my class at Harvard, and, you know, there were all of these, you know, major L&D heads for all the biggest companies in the world. And as we were going through the concepts of how you power people and figure out behavior and organizational culture, I realized, which was, you know, it was one of those aha moments for me, that the things I was doing intuitively, I just didn't know what the technical name was of it, but I was doing all the things that was being taught. And I was doing it sometimes with my own little unique twist on it. And now I had a name for what it is I was doing. I just didn't know what the name was. And, you know, this is where cross-domain kind of comes into play, because, you know, if I had limited my ability to say yes to things and not flirt with all the versions of my possible self, of being creative, I wouldn't have found what is called match quality, which is what you do and who you are is just so aligned. So, you know, I encourage you, that's when leadership looks and sounds really different, when, you know, that match quality happens. So don't limit yourself. So I'm gonna, this is actually going to be, this will require everyone to turn on their mics, Liana. I'm gonna give a quick little caselet where we're gonna practice what people's leadership styles are. So I'm gonna give you a scenario. This is actually a Stanford entry exam question looking at leadership styles. So here is the scenario, here's the caselet, and I'm curious to see what the solutions are. And you guys can type it in terms of the box. So the caselet is, it's a tiny little town. So just imagine, I don't know, the middle of nowhere in Tobago. Let's find a place in Tobago, one of my favorite places. And there's a house close by to the water, and the house catches fire, and all the villagers come out, and everybody has buckets, and they're like running back and forth, you know, in terms of the buckets, trying to out the fire, and nothing's happening. There's no fire station close by, and one of the community leaders comes out, and he needs to figure out very quickly how to get this group to get this fire outed. How does he lead this group, and how do you save this house from fire? I want you guys to type that in for me into your chat box. And then I'm gonna, you know, while you guys are doing that, I'll tell you this other, you know, interesting Stanford story. So this other interesting one is someone has a cancer cell, and the cancer cell is like in the absolute middle, and it requires laser to be able to kill the cancer cell. But if you use the deep laser, it will damage very, very healthy cells before you get to that particular cell. And if you use the light lasers, it won't go penetrate deep enough. So what the doctor decided to do in that scenario was use at the same time a variety of, you know, the smaller lasers, not the deep laser, and when it was done all together, they were able to kill the cancer cell. So, you know, that's another example of another one. All right, anybody has solutions on there for the water? I can't see the responses. So Liana, oh, I'm seeing it now. Okay, perfect.
Okay, great.
Okay, am I seeing any answers of how are we outing the fire?
Yes, let me read it. Kamala says, it's funny, in the medical world, an emergency officer has to have a wide range, but is subsequently labeled a jack of all trades, implying a master of none. Okay. Celia says, loud speaking to gather people and give instructions to collaborate. Bucket brigade.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else has any other way you're outing this fire? How do you lead these people, and how do you get the fire outed? Anyone?
Yeah, come on, turn your unmute yourself and share.
No,
okay, someone else
you guys can talk up. You can talk up. You can just unmute and just talk. Is the house worth saving? Can it be done safely? Okay. All right. What else do we have? Anything else? So I'm gonna, just because of in the essence of time and you guys opening up for questions. So the answer, I actually gave it to you guys. If any of you were listening to the story about the cancer cells. So if any of you were listening about the cancer cells, I said that you got everybody to do it at the same time. So the way you out the fire is not everybody throwing buckets of water at different intervals. It was everybody getting their buckets and throwing it at the same time. And that actually has way more power in outing a fire versus everyone doing it at different times, right? Because the strength of it was stronger. So, you know, it had actually nothing to do about leading people. It really had to do with how do you find out, and this is the thing about leadership, is you're going to have to think on your feet in leadership very, very often. And it doesn't have anything for the styles. Pick a bucket of water and ask everybody to pick one to douse the fire at the same time. Yeah, okay, Jacob. Yeah. Right. So everybody, you know, sometimes leadership requires you to drop any kind of process and all of those things that you might traditionally do, and you have to think on your feet, particularly in instances where you're trying to save the ship or save the business or save your department. And I will end, you know, in terms of that note of leadership. Hold on, let me get back to the tray of knowing your style and knowing when to apply those styles, right? So we all have a knee-jerk style of leadership, everyone. And do you know yours? Some of us, and there is no one size fit all. And that's the reason why I gave you that little caselet. But every single one of us has a knee-jerk style we go to, right? So you need to know what your knee-jerk style is in terms of leadership. And then you also need to know situationally, I may need to deviate from my knee-jerk style for these types of situations. You know, I've asked that question very humbly to all of you. Do you know your style? What style, even if you're managing? Do you know what style you have in terms of right now? So I will end on this note for all of you. I hope that was helpful. And certainly I'm going to go look at answering these questions. I'm going to look at all your questions now. All of you can access, if you want to figure out if you're extroverts, introverts, etc., you can go and download the GLEAC app. It's spelled GLEAC. In the Google Play and App Store, and you can get the mini version for free, and you can play around with some leadership modules. If you want the full premium version, you can email asma@GLEAC. And, you know, another thing I want to kind of encourage all of you on, you know, the great part about being a leader is, and becoming a leader, whether you are or not, is you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. It's just pure law of averages. So I encourage all of you to really consider, we have this incredible mentor community of people who are striving to become leaders, are leaders. We have Nobel Peace Prize winners. We have people from Google, Harvard, oil and gas sector. We have about 4 or 5 companies from the oil and gas sector. Najla is from Saudi Aramco, one of the first female engineers in Saudi. I encourage all of you to, you know, become a part of our mentor community. You can share your experiences with peers and experts, and, you know, be part of Zoom talks with other experts from around the world. We have about 48 countries of experts, and it's how we teach people. You know, our best, we have, you know, in terms of GLEAC, a product, we have always felt we learn best from sharing our experiences with others and from others. So I highly encourage all of you to become part of our mentor community. If you're interested in becoming part of the mentor community, you can communicate with Liana. And I look forward now to seeing some of your questions. So do we have questions, anyone?
Feel free to unmute and ask Sally. Otherwise, I have a few questions which I received via email. Celia, you have a question?
I have a comment. First of all, excellent presentation and talk, Sally. Thank you so much. When we look at the gap that we have in Trinidad and Tobago in the oil and gas industry in regards to women, extending or reaching that C-suite. And that is why I love the talk, because we try to give as much tools to women, especially through SPE and the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, to get all the tools and prepare themselves. You know, your insightful question about, do you want it? Do you really want it? It is really for you. It's never there. It's just like, okay, let's try to push ladies to go and get it. But sometimes that's not their calling. And they can become leaders of their own group without trying to really aspire to go that high, because it's perhaps not their calling. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, and I do have to tell you, it's particularly for women, we do a lot of work actually with the women in management. I think we had Liana one time, invited her to the talk, the women of Indian oil. So the women of oil and gas in your same sector in India. We do a lot of work with them. We have a huge project coming up with ADNOC, which is the oil and gas company here in the UAE. And a lot of times we're doing the mentoring and coaching sessions with the women and we do upskilling in the WhatsApp groups, just to be able for them to actually become self-aware, going, how do I want this? And if I want this and I need a community of women who've already been there and done that, how do we create that system? Because a lot of times they don't have that support system to be able to go, okay, is this the right thing for me or not? Because they don't know, they don't have people to ask. So I'm very happy that you found it very, very helpful, Celia. Yeah, not all of us are meant to or want to, right? Any other questions, anyone? Do I have a quiet group?
Apparently.
Yes, it seems so. But what about this self-awareness, or what you want, or your personality, and what will you, besides taking these tests to have like a first few idea or your style, what else will you recommend someone, independently of women or men, to do?
Yeah, so I remember, don't have anybody pigeonhole themselves to a personality test, right? So this is a knee jerk. I call it a knee jerk behavioral benchmark. And what you do is we have them role play in those leadership positions 5 to 10 minutes a day, where they get to see what comes up. And then you make a decision, right? We have to run them through a month of that, and they look and they go, wait a minute, this is not for me. Or yeah, this is something I really like, because it's almost like trying on clothes. Let me try on what it would look like to be a leader in this particular role and the situations that they're faced. And then you make a decision going, yeah, absolutely, I love the challenge that comes with this, or no, this is not something that I'm interested in. So Celia, it's not a one and done test, right? None of us are. And any role is not a one and done. You need to know what that role is going to entail. What skills are needed for that role? How is it going to come up and show? Does it require rule following at the highest level, and judgment and decision making at a certain level, and communication at a certain level? And am I comfortable with that? These are the things you need to figure out. Okay, how do you prepare yourself for knowing if you want a leadership role at an entry level? So that's what I just answered. We allow you to try it on. So for those of you who are on here, as I said to you, the access to the app is for free. You can go on there. And for those of you who really want to talk to people, who have been there and done that, I encourage you to become part of the mentor community and have access to professionals in your sector from all over the world. And show up and ask the questions, right? That's the best way, is find mentors and people in your space who's doing it, not only in Trinidad and Tobago, but from anywhere in the world. I think that's one of the best ways to figure out. Yes. Other questions?
Thanks, Sal. Ronica, she has her hands up. So, Ronica, you can unmute and ask a question.
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me?
Of course, I can.
Yep. Okay, great. So yeah, Ronica Kaplan. Okay, and so my question is around. Well, firstly, thanks for your presentation. I think there were a lot of very impactful insights. I'm a big fan of like Brene Brown, Adam Grant, Simon Sinek, and a lot of the stuff that you shared. Really aligned with their teachings or sharings, etc. So presently I'm reading a book called Atomic Habits by James Clare, and a very particular quote that I think was really impactful to me. It says, we don't rise to the level of our goals, we fall to our systems. And it's basically saying that we can have these high and lofty goals, but if our systems, our habits, our practices, our behaviors don't support those goals, then the likelihood of us accomplishing them is low to none, right? And I wondered if you can share from your experience any sort of habits, practices, behaviors that you've adopted to be successful and to accomplish your goals. You've done a lot. So anything you'd like to share on that would be appreciated.
Yeah, and you're absolutely correct, right? To move the mountain, you have to move a pebble every day. Yeah. And a lot of times when we have all of these big lofty goals, we think going to a couple times a year, a big, training on a weekend, a couple times a year, or sometimes even for me, I'm a big reader. And I also read that book, reading a bunch of books, and we have the knowledge and we want that for ourselves, but converting that knowledge into actual habits of us changing the way we show up in the world and the way we act is darn hard, really hard. And this is where I think journey mapping really comes into of how we bring the habits into our day, right? So for example, that specific example that you talked about goal and habits, there are three things that need to happen for you to change your habits. Number one, you have to consistently be practicing every day, and it can be just up to 10 minutes. So it doesn't even have to be more than 10 minutes, right? There's science behind this. It's called neuroplasticity, and you actually can create new neurons, which is new pathways in your brain with 10 minutes. It's the science behind meditation. So 10 minutes a day, one. Number two, the level of difficulty in which you're practicing needs to be different. So to give you an example, every day you can sit and you can play, you're trying to learn to play piano, but if every single day you play the same song over and over and over, you're not going to become an expert piano player. Now, if one day or for 1 week you practice something that is not that difficult, maybe the following week you practice something that's a little more difficult, it might be a little faster. So the levels of your practice needs to be different. And then the third key part that almost everyone kind of misses, and the whole learning system misses, right? Even if you're on LMS systems and you're learning online, Udemy, and is feedback from coaches and people who've been there and done that. And that's one of the reasons why we created this mentor community. So if you are, just think about it, you're doing something every day for 10 minutes, but if you're doing it wrong, or something's wrong in your technique and nobody pointed it out for you, you're building a habit in something in the wrong way. And that's why it's so important to have that feedback of industry experts and coaches to be able to go, no, you need to tweak here a little bit. No, in this situation, this is this different factor. So habit building, every single one of us, that's the beauty of being human. And that's the beauty of we can evolve and change, every single one of us. We might have a different rate of it. Some of us, we can evolve and change, like, I'm in the novelty seeking. So in 30 days, some of us, it takes longer. So you can change a habit anywhere from up to as little as 30 days or as long as 8 months. That's the typical span. Knowing also where you stand on that is really important, because you don't want to, if you're it takes you 3 or 4 months, because that's just how you're built. You don't want to be competing with the 30-day changer, because you're never going to be able to keep up and you're going to give up. So understanding the self-awareness of who you are and what it takes for you to shift and change. And with those 3 tiny little things of, it's like going to the gym, not with the treadmill constantly on 2, but some days you're running at 5, some days it's at 4, some days at 2. And then there's the gym instructor there every once in a while going, listen, you're running wrong. You need to run more with your toes, not with your feet flat. It's that simple thing that allows you to shift and change. And that's where process comes in, so that whole thing about you can have lofty goals, but if you don't get this right, you can only go to that level. So I hope that was helpful in the explanation.
Yes, very. Thank you.
My pleasure. Any other questions? So how do you guys feel about leadership in your space? I would love for one of you to answer that's going through so much transformation right now. Or is it happening in Trinidad and Tobago? Because I know here in this part of the world, Qatar, UAE, the entire sector is changing completely. Is that happening also in Trinidad and Tobago? And how do you feel about it from a leadership standpoint? Anyone?
I could add some of it.
Sure.
What I'm seeing right now, yes, there is a lot of transformation, but we are not seeing actual changes in terms of hard changes. We are hearing a lot of conversation about it. We are seeing a reduction in the investments from the big oil companies in some part of talking about from the point of view of the Caribbean region. However, we are seeing being discoveries as well happening in the Caribbean, and the opportunity to transform the countries right now, meaning taking advantage of this whatever window of time that we have for fossil fuels, and while this transformation is happening. So what I'm seeing from the point of view of leadership in the, I will say, at the government level and the state levels, is like a move to prepare to extract as much as possible while we can, while preparing or setting the foundation for this new energy sector, I would say.
Okay. Do you think you're seeing good leadership?
Certainly, what I'm seeing is that the leadership is being challenged a lot, because we are coming from what we're seeing is it's the standard type of leaderships where there are people who have been there for years and who were not challenged in the past for this kind of transformation. So if the leadership is being shaken, I will say.
Yeah. Okay. And that's where it in times of change. Remember, we talked about cross domains, and in terms of times of change, and challenge is actually where true leadership comes out, right? So it's an exciting time for all of you. Very excited. I'm excited for all of you. So I would love, before you drop off, if you can provide a little bit of feedback. I would appreciate it wholeheartedly. It always helps. Babita, you have a question. Please ask.
I wanted to make a comment, like going off of what Celia just contributed. In terms of, I'm part also of the Gaia Sustainability Program that SB has, and that was created internationally and through the Society of Petroleum Engineers, and we have a chapter in Trinidad and Tobago. So it continues what we were saying as well, that we are seeing that where people have to come from different sectors and in terms of some of the changes with respect to sustainability being part of the oil and gas sector. And on our committee, we did include other people from different industries as part of the committee. And tonight on TT Express, the newspaper actually has an online presence now, and there's going to be a chat where Kishan, we had him on. He's working in the Ministry of Planning. He would have represented Trinidad and Tobago at the COP26 talks. So he is going to be on, like, giving feedback as to what happened, and so that's interesting. Like, people want to know what are the changes, like the government and the planning level will have to be making, which will also be affecting the oil and gas sector. And we did have him on as a SP speaker, and we're planning to have another talk with him early next year.
Oh wow! So you are seeing it happening, which is, you know, where it's happening all across, also here in the region, right? But you know, we're seeing it at play. You know, so it's beyond now the planning. It's actually the implementation where the entire oil and gas sector is literally going through data transformation, digital transformation. You know, here in the UAE, they've committed to be zero carbon by 2030. So there's just so much happening across the region. Right now, it's an exciting time for the oil and gas sector. Okay, any other questions? So I look forward to seeing all of you here in Dubai for the World Fair. Oh, Ariana.
Yeah.
Ariane, yes.
I am in food and beverage manufacturing, and I think there's also a growing effort by leadership to try and increase our exports. I mean, you guys would be familiar with Export TT. I think, you know, diversifying not just oil and gas, but our other sectors. I'm a personal believer that the way forward for all industries is through agriculture. Because I think things like biodiversity, you know, tie into refineries and food and beverage, especially from an export perspective. But I think there's definitely, I mean, I worked for an international engine company. And so I've seen the transition from, you know, diesel, gas to electrification. And I think one of the issues in Trinidad is the lack of infrastructure and policies in place. But I've seen leadership through organizations like the UNDP, where they have, you know, been working with NGOs to kind of increase awareness and like try to put infrastructure in place in Trinidad. But I think there's definitely a move towards sustainability and also creating like more inclusive environments for anyone, like for example, women in particular. In all of these technical industries, it's, you know, you often find females in communication or people roles, and you don't as often find in technical roles. And so I think there's a lot of promotion through the local universities to bring up the level and skills of women in the workplace in these technical fields. I see a lot of supporting that. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's not only in Trinidad and Tobago. I mean, I do have to tell you, here in the UAE, just to give you an example, you know, I think in the month of October, there were about $362 million funded to startups. And off of that amount, $362 million, $100,000 went to women in startups. Yeah. So it's not only in that part of the world. Now, I do think, and you know, in terms of food tech is probably one of the hottest sectors right now in the Middle East. I just don't know how, you know, so you know, my foundation has done projects with UNDP in the food sector. You know, I just don't know if we're a full-fledged in terms of food tech and how far. This was a long time ago. This was maybe 8 or 9 years ago. I just don't know how much in terms of the sector, but it's a very, very hot sector right now, certainly in this part of the world. And in terms of your questions about, you know, process, you know, you know, when process is clear and fair and transparent, people trust the system and they trust leaders. And I think that has always been, you know, not solely in Trinidad and Tobago, just most developing countries, that has always been an issue. That lack of process leads to the lack of transparency, which leads to the lack of trust, which leads to, so, I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. Any other questions? Anyone? No? All right. So greetings from Dubai. It was an absolute privilege to spend this time with you. Any questions? All of you interested in being mentors, reach out to Liana. I encourage you wholeheartedly to become part of the community. Those of you who want to access and try on leadership rules, download the app and you can get access to the free benchmark. If you want that big benchmark, that's the British Psychology approved one, just email asma@gleac.com and she will be able to connect you with that. I look forward to reading your feedback on Trustpilot. Thank you wholeheartedly. I appreciate all of your attention. Thank you, Liana, for having me.
Thank you so much, Sallyann, for taking this time. And we can see from the feedback, it has been really well received and you raised some great points. And this is why we reached out to you, the diversity and inclusion section, because I myself felt that you would bring a lot of value to the community. And I'm so happy that everyone took time out on Saturday to listen to our fellow Trinidadian. While I went ahead to remind people to come in, I mentioned she is a fellow trainee, breaking barriers in the UAE. So thank you so much. And I mean, with all of this engagement, you guys could definitely continue here with the mentorship community within GLEAC. I encourage that. Or maybe we'll have a part 2 series with Sallyann because everyone seems to enjoy it. So thank you. And remember to leave the feedback to support Sallyan's reviews.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.